Buddhi Geshe Thubten Rinchen in Gambadi Sangye Shindamete Wagi Lokunandakshina Chabasho Idam Guru Radhamandala Kamlayatayami Chadan Soki Chonava Chanchu Badu Dani Kyapsuchi Daki Cheshengi Besanamgi Lola Penche Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chadan Soki Chonava Chanchu Badu Dani Kyapsuchi Daki Cheshengi Besanamgi Lola Penche Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chadan Sagi Chonamna Chanchu Padu Dani Gyapsuchi Daki Chanyen Gibe Sanamki Dola Penche Sangye Drupasho.
Kaza, Ramoni member from Bocolata, really here, Sarima, Gundala, Teni Moni, Messi, Chikia, Shawan, like your money, maybe Frank, your money, maybe Chikia. You won't look down that, turn the money, Mizukola, Niche, Shawan getting to turn the money, Miss Chikia, young, you won't look getting to turn the money, Chikia, and that Tilia.
So we finished explaining how three different groups of things don't have any nature of their own. And we started with the lack of a definitive self-nature, a definitive nature of having some kind of characteristics, the way the Buddha called it, with regard to things which were, what was the first one? Guntat. Constructs, right? And then we went on to the second one, which is to prove that there is no nature of having started with regard to things which are dependent or come from causes or other conditions. And then we proved a lack of nature of being ultimate with regard to two of the groups, which was with regard to dependent things and with regard to Yongdup, or the empty things, emptiness itself. Okay, so those are the those three descriptions of things that don't have a nature have already been finished. That's kind of a review of what we did yesterday. Then, as you recall, yesterday evening we talked about some kind of slight misconception that the omniscient Jonamba had, and we're going to go back to that. Remember, we just introduced it, and now we're going to go back and explain it in more detail.
신이 주는 거는 따뜻하게 계속 있는 것 같은 거 좀 믿는 거다. 생각합니다. 그런 다음에 쉬어도 영혼이 뭐라 뜻이야. 네, 쉬어도 맞지 뭐 그런 식으로 그래서 순간은 되는 경험으로 시절한 신을 그냥 되어가지. 신앙은 쓰지. 개면지 지체라는 게 되지. 오님이 그 경험으로 걸어 보시면 그런 거 마치바다 마카 과시 군다라 경험이 좀 저 그런 게 되는 거죠. 오님이 순간을 되니 이게 뭐 던져버려 있으면 따로따로 리마지 남가스 지가래 이거 아니나 그것도 시원하고 거는 이 저도 맞지 말고 그거는 시원 신명을 되고 시 도시에는 시원 좀 있으면 신나고 그래서 그냥 숨어는 근데 신는 거는 인간이 권위는 나치다 가려는 미시다 남아도 주요 군다기 생기니 최라 시후지 그러면 신이 쓰지 공부도 다 알리딩 알람사 님도 죽들라 마 같이 딜링 못해 니바들랑에 저랑 봐 주드자 이게 제
나서
오케이 제용도 따들 롱직타 하시면 되는 배값 소양 남아 소매 받는 쪽바시 다음에 쪽바 송데 어떻게 이제 최신 규제라 최기다 나바 제점기 저바 메가 콜라 최기 다음에 용도 조바 신도 사이체 신이 어떻게 송하래 가르소나 이제 전남배 용도 때다 동이 돼 동이 때 메가 말해 두바래 어떻게 송하래 대인은 저랑 가르다 게 루고도서는 다다디 딱도 도대 공den이 롱디나 최진 뒤제라 스탄다 되는 도와 오 두신 가려 되나 두제 남기 다음에 봐 짬탕 되나 도대 공den은 두제는 인등 답하지 땅이 숨 주바 디바들 두제 남기 다음에 봐 짬탕 뭐니 매봐 짬니 답이 생이 버민도 쓰고 다음에 봐 짬시 찍와 니한테다 가자 제 짬기 내가 쓸 대지그레스 배값 수마게 다 배값 수세양 도대 공리 룸만 샴돼요 샴돼요 이 값라 가르스는 배콜라 리마치기 남가 세고 배샤네 디마시 남가 시기사 나라도 시에 온도 얘기 나라도 공부 통해 들으면지나 그래서 지금 단일라 남남 세야지네 남가 시에부터 가서 동자 들지 동자들 시기사 다 통해 내가 데려와 통해 여바데카 맞잠 콜 통하고 받잠들 근데 디마시 남가 시장기도 화단들아버지 용도 세야 거야 가서 취기다 각점기 매각기라 지메지 세고 제가 더 티니니 개려송아 저랑 게 용도 때 내가 말에 두바리 세티 디게 송아선 정원로 송아를 심히 소나고 파송 말이
He's going to look for a reference while I'm translating that he's looking for. So we go on to Geshe-Kappa's refutation of omniscient Jonamba's idea that, remember what it was yesterday? Geshe-Kappa is expressing the position that emptiness or Yongdu, what we call total existence or something like that, is the exact flip-flop, is the exact opposite of a self-existent thing and not just something which is other than that. And then Jonamba says, I don't like that way of interpreting it because when you think of emptiness, you think of a positive object in the same way that you do when you think of a vase. So I think emptiness should be a positive thing and not a negative thing. It's not a simple absence of something, it's a presence of something. And this is a very famous misconception. Then Geshe-Kappa he uses two different scriptural authorities to show omniscient Jonamba that this is incorrect. The first one is from Dode Gongdel itself, from the book in which the Buddha explains what he meant when he taught his other books, okay? And in that one it says, he specifically says, in here it's page 14, line 8, something like that, line 7. He uses the expression, dag me patsam, dangoni me patsamni, dundabetsini. And the most important word here is tsam. Tsam means simple, in the expression simple lack of something or the simple absence of something. So he says Lord Buddha is using the same language. He doesn't say positive thing or a positive thing. He's saying it's a simple lack of something. So the word simple is the one that Geshe-Kappa points out to Jonamba and says, look, this is the most important word here. This is referring to the idea of emptiness being a simple absence or a simple lack of something and not a positive object. Then Geshe-Kappa goes on to point out an illustration in scripture that the Lord Buddha himself uses to describe emptiness. And he says it's like space. It's like space. And in Tibetan the word for space is nam or namka, and that also means sky. So he says, Geshe is careful to point out that when we say space, we don't mean the sky. You know, when I say nam or namka, I'm not referring to this blue thing out here. Space means the simple absence of obstruction. So what we mean by the word space is that the simple lack or simple absence of something. So the Buddha himself used that as an illustration to demonstrate how emptiness is. So the Buddha himself is using a simple lack or a simple absence of something as an illustration of emptiness. So Jetsun Kappa says to Jonamba, the Buddha himself, in both a scriptural authority from the explanation of what the sutras mean, and in another scriptural authority where he compares emptiness to empty space, or a simple lack of obstruction, he says in those two references the Buddha is clearly saying that it's a simple absence of something, a simple lack of something, and not a positive object. The reason Geshe couldn't find it is he was looking too far down in the book, and here it was right on the next page. The next page it says on the 10th line from the top, he says Dindam Yanda Pak. It comes from the same book. I'm sorry. From the explanation of the meaning of the sutras. And he says, oh, Dindam Yanda Pak, this is how it is. I'll give you an example. Space itself is a simple lack of obstructible form, and that's what sets it off. It is a simple absence. It is a Raptachewa means like a simple lack of something, okay? Devoid of something. And then he says that's exactly the way in which I want to describe to you the lack of self to things. That's exactly the same way it is. And so there's the example itself. So from this description that you find on page 15, from the previous description on page 14, it's obvious that emptiness, or what we call total existence or Yongdup, that it is a simple lack of the self-existence of things, and it's a simple flip-flop from a self-existent thing which doesn't exist. That the simple absence of that, and a simple lack of that, is what Yongdup or emptiness is. Better make a mark on that last part, because we're going to come to something later on that might give us a headache like we had yesterday on this one. Okay.
동시 최전고 뒤지에
나네.
두지
나네.
도이가
나네.
샴데나 최전 뒤지에라 어때 용도 시디자더니 최전 뒤지에지기 띵도 각자 다 꼭각 받텔라 아니 각 메가
나서. 나서.
디 용사지 레바디안 두이
나네.
용사지 뭐다 알리 tik샴데는 마요 알리 텔다지
Gandhi bayat cha de mche da che ngote bayat cha sa che yin no yo ma da nyokta di re nasa
tu lu chen pa che pa
nasa
ta de ba da maung ba da tin
la
da wi
nasa
ke jin du che
nasa
yu di mang bu su du che pa se go ta da wi
nasa
du che se da gang ru su ya cha ko
nasa
제가 두치 다 두지 시바도 강다지 두지 시바도 노르리라
나서
두지 시바도 유지 망부지 수 두네 아니 제바 빨치 뭐 진짜 가다와 당 대바지
나서
인사도서 오 용도 문딩 제도서 말아도 뭐든 동시 체제지 오 인지 매지 두지지 진도 각자 다가 받지 아니 용도 세버려서 야 그만 되니 오다로야지 그래서 그때는 세야 탑수는 니
나서 For those of you who know Tibetan, page 14, line 5, this is where a big hassle is going to come later. So you might want to even make a little mark, a mental note or a middle note in your notes that page 14, line 5, on that line, Lord Buddha describes the third group, right? The Mind-Only School's third group, which is called total existence or something. We have to find a better translation when we get to a better description of it. But that is described as the lack of a self-nature to things which are duche. Duche means, has a couple of meanings, but in this case, in the sutra, the word means factors, in the sense of a cause. Something which brings about something else. That's called a duche. And those are always changing things, okay? So you have to realize that, you have to be sensitive to the fact that when the Buddha describes emptiness or Yongdrup in the third category, he's describing it as the lack of self to things which act as causes. Okay? Then when Jetsun gets to explaining it, which is on page 14, the 8th line from the bottom, he says that thing which Lord Buddha is pointing out as empty when he describes the third category, which is emptiness or total existence or something like that, that thing which he is describing as being empty is all things which have been produced. Okay, which is more like the past tense of producing. You see, when the Buddha describes it as the lack of self-nature, he says the lack of self-nature of things which act as causes or act as factors. When Jetsun Kappa gets to explaining it, he says the Buddha takes as the object which is empty all those things which have been produced. Okay, using the past tense. Then I asked Geshe if the point is that those two words are present tense and past tense, agent and result. And he said that's not the main point here, because really those cover the same objects. But the big question here will come about of why do they take changing things or caused things or even causes, which are all the same category, they're all the same group of stuff. Why do they take all those as being what it is, which is explained as being empty, and when you say that those don't have a self, you arrive at group number 3. Okay, the fact that Lord Buddha has taken this group as being the thing which is empty of self-existence in order to get the third group is significant, and there's going to be a hassle about it later.
도대 공대 통랑 군지 전화한데 내대기 돌아 향시 내대기 도세 온데서 다 지심도 직선 이런 딱딱 해는 어때 다 지심도 켈링도 와다 켈링나 디 도대 공대 디 나라 용도 지금 다기 계제들이 니 계제 니线 你当각자 최기 다고 막 하나 각자 각 내가 세고 세고 시비도 다디 도디 결혼 다 지심도 켈링기 여자 켈레나 다 찍고나라 남가 빼샤 야게 각자 다 각자 내가 신호 점 세디 니니 찍고라 세고 지와 다 결혼한테 켈링기 와 다양 쇼 찍네 롱룹시에디 니 메카마리 두바나와리 세디 갈라와 body lungi tan strandi tata kelling sixty kelling yero that's one sebo shi wa ne chorangi keje shoji ni yondu mega mari waro so it can do shi wa
then Jetson Kappa is finishing him off on page 14, fifth line from the bottom, where he says, now listen, Jonangwa, you, as I recall, you accept that this particular sutra, meaning the sutra in which the Buddha explains the intent of his other sutras, right, as being ngedun, which means literal, right? Remember what we're talking about, the whole book, right? What's literal or what's figurative? He says, as I remember, you believe that this particular sutra is literal, right? And he has to say, yes, I believe it's literal, meaning I have to take it on face value. Whatever it says, I have to take it literally, and not I can't interpret it as something else. Whatever, if I accept that this sutra is literal, then I have to say that the precise wording here is what the Buddha really meant, and I'm not allowed to interpret it into something else. So then he says, and here we have two specific references in the book that you say is literal. First, where the Buddha says that emptiness, or what we're calling total existence, is the simple reverse, or the simple absence of the ultimate self-existent thing, which is what we call parts, okay? The self-existence of Dharma means the self-existence of your parts as opposed to the self-existence of you. So when we refer to the self-existence of objects, remember that that means mainly the parts of yourself as opposed to yourself. So he says, remember that we've all agreed that the self-existence of objects, the lack of that, this book says, is what the third group is, first of all. Second of all, in the example that the Buddha used in his description of empty space, as being a good example for emptiness, he kept using the word sam. All throughout here he's used the word sam, which means simple. Simple meaning implying simple absence of something, simple lack of something. So he says, you, first of all, on one hand you're accepting that this sutra is literal. And then on the other hand you're saying, oh, but emptiness is a positive thing, self-standing positive thing. It's a discrete positive object, you know. So on one hand you're accepting that emptiness is a discrete positive object. On the other hand you're accepting that this sutra is literal, and this sutra says that emptiness is a simple lack of something. So you are completely contradicting yourself. You have no feet to stand on. Your position is wiped out. Okay.
Dindiri, tanda di yingding shu chu shi bati, yingding tama ta, yongdu dini chönam gi dai ngoni me, ngoni, pato ngo namba che pa sam yinbe, chönam gi tong dabo ngoni me ba she sun ji yiche, di keche di karsan sem zambe, yongdu shakang pe, yongdu shakang, de chik che, ta di sham dini di shu chönga digi, ying chik ding nipa tela rin, kak pe rangi ngo la rangi tengi chuba me pe, ngoni me ba mi she pe ru so, si tu ta, tanju we, 용도 샤탕지야로 코코 각자 복각당고 제도다 샘담바 코라랑기 각자 보다 다샘 단주 각자님의 카가 쇼라 인다 아니 단주 루지 간다디 가도 용도 지와로 뭐 단다들라 쇼신기가 말했습니다 쇼신기가 계정 위티레
So now the next point, we're moving on to remember that we described emptiness, or the third group in the mind-only school, as being the simple lack, or the reverse of a self-existent thing, the gakja, the thing that we deny, and that we've just established with Jonama, for example, that it is the simple lack or the simple absence of the thing which we deny. But remember that there's a difference between how the mind-only school identifies the thing that emptiness is empty of, and there's a difference in the way that the middle way school explains how what the thing is that emptiness is empty of. So obviously Yongdub, or emptiness itself, according to each school, is going to be different. Why? Because the thing that they deny, the thing that emptiness is empty of, they have different ways of identifying that. So Jetson Kop is going to go on to say that, look, you mind-only school people, you don't really know how to identify the thing which is self-existent correctly, because, and then that leads you to misidentify what emptiness is, because emptiness, or Yongdrup, that total existence things, is the reverse, or the absence of that thing. So you don't know how to establish really what the third group is, because you don't know how to establish clearly what the thing is that we deny when we speak of emptiness not having something.
다 강치도 양 뜯고 내가 걸 두었으나 샘잠비 강자 타도 보다 탄유 강자 타도 내가가 대인도다 아니 샘잠비 다 강자 타도 나라도 원진 제투요 말 단다 계속 치야 말이야 다 샘잠비 강자 타도 고샴데 다 샴데 뭐 문제 샤나 코라 세보야 그 가동이 샤나세 다 강한 다르게 샘잠비 가르샤기 두고서나 분배팅도 돈이 고샤는 데서 코란데 되바다 각자 오까 내가 셴이 분배팅도 돈이 샤기 두고마도 분배팅도 랑기 챙이 두바 오까 내가 샤는 콜라 돈이 샘잠비 샤기 오마 다 샘잠비 루소 티레지 야기디 모션이 루소레 루소 팀미션이 루지레 정말로 정말 좀 문제지 단다 다가라 이게 되니까.
So here's the very key at this point. The key here, the crucial point, is that the identification of what emptiness is empty of, the identification of what it is that we deny, it differs between the mind-only school and the middle way school, and that's the key here. The mind-only school is saying that they do describe an emptiness. They do describe an emptiness, for example, of a water pitcher. They do say that it's the lack of that self-nature of the water pitcher, but the way in which they describe the thing which they deny will be talked about much more later. That's coming much more later. How they specifically identify the thing it is that we say emptiness is empty of. But in the Madhyamika Prasangika school, in the highest school, they are describing it as the lack of any definitive nature, or the lack of any nature of existing by definition. They use the same wording. So, but what it means in the Madhyamika school, what it means in the middle way school, for something to exist by definition is something totally different. And at this point, Jetsun Kappa is saying, you mind-only school, even though we haven't identified how they identify, even though we haven't described yet precisely how they identify the thing that doesn't exist, that we're denying, he's still saying at this point, you don't know how to identify it correctly. Now, why that is, how that is going to come later. We haven't yet really gotten into clearly what the object that what the object which we deny when we speak of emptiness is for the mind-only school. Now, at this point in our class, you guys are starting to get some kind of feeling or some kind of instinct that how they identify it and how the middle way identifies it must be different. You've got a clear feeling that there must be some boo-boo here, you know. There must be some discrepancy about how they identify what emptiness is empty of and how the middle way describes what emptiness is empty of. Although we haven't gone through in specific detail how the mind-only school identifies what it is that emptiness is empty of, what a self-existent thing would be like. But anyway, the only point here is that you start getting a feeling or sensitivity to the fact that they're going to identify them differently.
Tindita luso si dema kashi tyo. Semta luso de tinde shagere, kayuna sha mudu kere, tinde shagere sundu are. Ti sundan ti niwa le ten, jangolo ma tongwa ba chi koran ki ta tawa kele mo ma ji ta te tanju wa ti le ba ko tenji chi koyo.
In these pages, in this section, Jetsun Kappa is constantly using language like in your system or according to you, or this is the way that you guys posit it. And the implication there is that he doesn't accept it, and that later on he's going to be describing to you a different system, which is his own system, which is the middle way system. So Geshe points out that throughout this section, and especially in these last few lines, when Jetsun Kappa is saying, that's how you guys describe it, that's how you guys establish it, this is your system, that by implication he's saying, my system's coming later, I believe in the Madhyamika system, that's the right system, and you're going to get this system later.
pen ji sigira miku kuran miku ngal miri dimbe jing so so malam na yang shenda tele shemba jing so malam na chura miri dinde jire ba chura miri dinde jire ba sen bage shen la si miri ro jaga miri ba chura jaga miri ba si sikdi niwala ten la ke ji ga so chura jaga miri mai ba ta ngar so mari se na malam na ya chura jaga miri ro chura jaga miri se sa no kon miri ko chura jaga mai ba ji ko
For example, if you have a person who's wandering around India and he meets other people and he's always saying to them, oh, you're Indian, aren't you? Or, oh, you're Tibetan, aren't you? Or, you know, oh, you're from this country, India, right? Anyone who goes around saying that is automatically implying that they're not from India. You see what I mean? They're implying that they are some other kind of people, some other kind of nation's people. So it's the same thing here. Geshe Thubten is going around saying, oh, you believe that, yeah? You believe that, yeah? Oh, your position is that, right? And the implication is exactly the same. That's not my belief. That's not my system. Okay. Niga get to Gani. 287, page. Yes, sir.
Tani ditiwa chate chata. Ta ganga shetara yanama semba tanju ganga luso shetara. Ditiwa chate. Ji na kare se de. Shinda chimbi su ni ji sura ki chawa da ngi be ten na pa chewa tang. Teta ki gongba kebe angbo nam ji so so zai go mang du nang na se de da. Su shinda chimbi su ko la ni cha so na. Teta ki gongba de la keba su su semda luso na de tai ni ko na mang bu chu. Uma be na la luso tai ni ta ta la chim cha re ni. Uma rang ju luso de 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 tai ni keba mang bu chu. Han ju luso ya de tai ni mang bu chu ma re. Tede chung song a se ta su jamgol ma tong ga ba chi bo khorang la chiwa ji tang.
La sa.
Na ta cheja se jamgol ma tong ga ba khorang la.
Nani.
Te ni ji nang ne se semda bi sing ki solo chi wi lu so chi da. Uma bi solo chi wi lu so ni ya ro. Ko ni ji nang ne gong je ken bu kang ki je su dang se da gong ba di ge ge ken bi so ga jo ro nga ra zu ta sang ken bi so chi. 파바 통에 찍래 버리 이렇게 먹을 찍라 나서 찍래 버봐
나서
관계 제수도 수위 제수 당은 다 저랑 개인도 길에 따와 가를 주다 지중나 세고 제가 관계 제수 당은 고바 제수 당네 녀된도 샹바 강라 타르도 변도 되어바디 가리 되어바디 저바 지식스는 라쇼 라바레스 지중나 지나 나 신의 책견 좀 그걸로 동거로 지금 권한 남린 캐리 연주 리듬기 레시크라 니네 그메장 zambulingi nang la one chane pe nang ba sanji chung de ji gun lu so de pe ka pe de chima me pa chi xian ye la da min de ke ba ma bu shi ga ga la mi sing ma ku xia pe yue de song a ku me jang ta de ri kon de din jung mi li den ji ji su tian jing mi de tam ji je je ba se yu ka se na yu jin yo ta re den de yi bi da ji su ta de de ko la ka se yu ni ke ba ta 코란 찌기찌기를 떼네 초밥 그래서 여러 셈 한주 떼네 오 그다 텐징 밑에 탐지 찌기 봐서 텐징 시대도 아니 텐이 두바 딩고 가는 봐 지바 지겐이 단 텐징 밑에 탐지 찌기 봐 나와 레옹 저 반대 나와 타가는 거 수디 있는 거 저 반대 나와 타가는 거 주, 두용 아니 양면은 반대 나와 타가는 순도 어디 내가도 답답해 어디 샤로 와 가르치 로미 군디 타르 체제와 시대 답답샤도 메독 카샤니 주요도 니마샤도 수 칸숨 답답샤는 거 뒤에 카치니 군다 있는 군데 오 쿠이타디 제바 상제 장기 템베 람폰네 시대다 텐다와 티반덴 다와 타베 외가와티 농사고 로가 상제 장마 유니 원긴 티 상제 장디 과치 버스는 루루루루루기 기두소시지 일단 산디에장기 때문에 남통네 루루루상 민팅도 맞아 루루루상 민팅수 오불루루기 루상버딘 캠켈레 미지게 다 남주 지레니 지게 시라 레니 지게 삼로도 여기에 되라 오불루루기 루상버딘 미심바 미팅이 수지의 연구만 예, 다 고장이 되게도 뭐 아무것도 정말로 좀 아들라 비니
Okay, so whether or not you guys ever get to the bottom of the book, but if you want to know what Jetsun Kappa himself believes, you know, when he says, oh, you're from that system, you know, and implying that I'm from that system, if you want to know if in the final end, in the final end of this whole book, you know, what Jetsun Kappa is going to say is his belief system. Because don't forget that all through this book, in all those pages, he will have described all of the beliefs of the mind-only school on these questions, and then he will have described all the beliefs of the middle way school on all these questions. And then at the very end of the book, which I hope you guys get to someday, here's his final position on what country he's from, you know, what person he is. Page 287. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines down. And Jetsun Kappa says, Dani Tiwachate, let's ask a question now. And Geshe Lao points out that he's asking a question to himself. This is like a rhetorical question. Okay, so Jetsun Kappa is asking a question to Jetsun Kappa. And the lines here say, now we have seen in the text that you've written how the idea of what is literal and what is figurative and how to distinguish between the two is covered or is treated in the great two systems, meaning the great systems of the two great innovators, meaning the mind-only school and the middle way school. And then there are Gomba Kepa Wambo. Now we have seen how different people, you've gone through how many different people, even among the mind-only school and even among the middle way school. For example, in Swatantrika, the independent group, the lower part of the Madhyamika, you've described in detail all the different divisions, all the different ways that people look upon the question of how to distinguish between what is literal and what is figurative. And among all those, there are two. Gongdal Kempo means, in this case, Kempo normally means an abbot, or the person who gives you your monastic vows. So here it just means big shot, you know, big men. So the two big men who are trying to explain what the Buddha meant when he's talking about, this is what I really meant in the scriptures, in that book, okay? So there are many people who follow either one or the other of them. There are many ways of describing what is figurative and what is literal. And now, please, at the very end, can you tell me which one do you choose to follow? You know, which one of these two great innovators, or which one of these two great systems are you, Jetsun Kappa? Which one do you claim to follow? Okay, and then he says, China means, if you ask me that question, then he breaks off into this beautiful poetry. His answer to himself, he breaks off into these beautiful lines of poetry, okay? And it's something like, you know, I must admit that from the very depths of my heart, I have infinite respect for all the eloquent words of all the great masters, Buddhist masters who have ever come in this world. You know, so first he starts off by saying, you know, in my heart, deep in my heart, I have total respect and love for all the incredible teachings of all the great Buddhist masters who have ever come in this world. But, okay, there is a system where they use a very, very beautiful explanation of dependent origination, what it means for something to be dependent. And they base everything on this explanation, what it means for something to be dependent, and they use that reasoning to destroy all our tendencies to see things as self-existent. So he says, there's one system that uses that method very effectively. That is... he says, we can open that Madhyamika door a little bit, okay? Just that when we get to these verses, you can peek in there a little bit, okay? This is sort of, in Tibetan they say dende. Dende means very auspicious, to go to the end and let you peek in at the end and peek in at the system of the Madhyamika and it's auspicious that you will end up being there. Okay, so then he says, there's one system that uses dependent origination to destroy all our tendencies to hold things as self-existent. Now we're on to page 288, and that is the beautiful, cool moonlight that comes from Chandrakirti, and Chandra means moon, right? So he's the great explainer of the middle way in the books that we use in the monastery. So your moonlight has come down and opened the eyes of my kunda. Kunda is a kind of a lotus, or a kind of a rare flower that only blooms at night. So this is a beautiful example. You know, he's saying my kunda lotus night flowering eyes have been opened by the moonlight, referring to Chandra Kirti. Okay, and I've laid eyes now. I've been able to see the path set forth by him and by Buddha Palita, who explained Chandrakirti. Okay, and so having seen this, anyone who's had that moonlight come down to their eyes and see that way and that unique path, which uses dependent origination, a deep interpretation of dependent origination, not just, oh, things come from their causes and their conditions, but somebody who explains it in the ultimate way that the Prasangika does, meaning projections, right? So anyone who's seen that path in that moonlight and had their eyes opened in that way, then where could you ever find anybody who wouldn't follow Arya Nagarjuna's system once they'd seen all that? So he says, that's my answer. Okay, that's my answer to your question. Whose question? Jetsun Kapa's own answer to himself. Question to himself. Okay. Since we skipped to the back of the book, don't go mixing up the mind-only school here. Okay, I mean, take your mind out of the mind-only school, and don't forget that these words are being spoken from a totally different viewpoint. The only reason I skipped to the back of the book and gave you this particular section is that I wanted you to appreciate Jetsun Kapa's, making what do they call it? Aspirations? Aspersions. It's called aspersions in English. Like he's saying, that's their system. This is how they describe it. This is what they think. And I wanted to make it clear to you that what Jetsun Kapa is doing here in those oblique references is that that's not my system. I got my own system. And here his description of what he believes his system is. So I just wanted to take you from mind-only, his saying, that's the mind-only school, that's what they think, to the back where he says, and here's what if you ask me what system I am, here's the system I am. Okay, think. And I wanted to make it clear to you that what Jetsun Kapa is doing here in those oblique references is that that's not my system. I got my own system, and here his description of what he believes his system is. So I just wanted to take you from mind-only, his saying, that's the mind-only school, that's what they think, to the back where he says, and here's what if you ask me what system I am, here's the system I am. Okay? Nowadays in the world, mind-only school is very popular, especially among the Western scholars, and I've had people come in my room and say, Jetsun Kapa's real viewpoint is mind-only school. That's what Jetsun Kapa really believes. And I say, no, he didn't. And I stick this in their face, and I say, look, this is what he said, and he didn't say that. He said he's Manimika. And I use that nowadays for all those people who are going around saying that, the real true teaching is the mind-only school. You might have a tendency as a Western Buddhist or just normal Buddhist and say, some people come up to you and say, some scholar comes up to you and says, the teaching of Jetsun Kappa is really mind-only school. What Jetsun Kappa really believed in was the mind-only school. And then you might have this tendency to say that, oh, no, he was the great Jetsun Kappa. He was the wonderful Jetsun Kappa. He's our great root lama of our tradition, you know. He couldn't have been. He must have been in Madhyamika Prasangika. He must have been the highest Madhyamika school, you know. And I don't want you to answer like that. That's a dumb way to answer. That's not how we should answer that question. Somebody comes up to you and says that Jetsun Kappa believes in mind-only school, or he represents mind-only school. I want you to stick this reference in their face, you know, and say, look, it says in his book, he says, that's not my system. What I am is Madhyamika Prasangika. I follow Chandakirti. I follow Nagarjuna. That's my system.
What?
That was a cookie that I gave you as a treat. And now we're going back to the main text. Not biscuit la shida gawa chi yore. Not biscuit la big gawa yore. Kula hako yore. Chetan gemon kengene. Yeah, special cookie because he likes cookies.
Dine sungde ta yagi thai sumbu korani ya yagi shawa yagi la unda la thengi ngoni me la shawa la jawa ngoni me la yondu la thena dam ngoni me tikla phar ta shawa da yondu unda sumbu ko tinge yindi pe xie ta shawa ko thengi ngoni me ha ma re unda de thengi ngoni me pe xie shawa de jawa ngoni me pe xie yondu de thena dam ngoni me pe xie do sun unda da shawa da yondu de pe xie dine sungde.
The next section is, section number 3, is an illustration. These are illustrations to illustrate the truth of how those three groups of things lack any self-nature. So we got through saying that nominal things, what do you call it? We've been calling it constructs, don't have any nature of their own. They don't have any nature of being, what was it? Of having characteristics, the Lord Buddha said. And then when he got on to things that are dependent, things that come from their causes, then he said that they don't have any nature of growing. And then when he got on to things, emptiness itself, which you're calling total existence or something like that, doesn't have any nature of being, what was the third one? Ultimate, of being ultimate. So those were the three statements that Lord Buddha made. That's how he covered those three groups. And now we're going to get an illustration that will help us understand what, that fact. There'll be some kind of metaphor, some kind of concrete illustration that will help us remember what those three are.
남게 매도 때 직장에 시험한테 주마다 주마생으로 단자 두네 지금 로 추추제 가르쳐래 미줄 때 저로 그 시험하고 미줄 때 다 용도 때 다이나도 꽤 해야 돼 남가도 때 있잖아 군지 전화 받아라 때 담배 거세 온 용도 때 아니 남가도 주마신 남가다 때 있잖아 그것도 좀 때.
The three examples that are used for the three groups of the mind-only school are coming up are the first one is what we call constructs. And the example here is what we call a flower that grows in midair. Like no dirt, no water, no nothing. It just starts to grow there in the midair. Okay, that's the first example. That's the example for constructs, which is the first of the three groups. The example for the second one is something like magic show or an illusion. For example, Geshe says a movie, for example. The relative reality of a movie is an example for number 2. And then the example for number 3, which we've already mentioned, the example for emptiness is empty space itself, space itself. It could be translated as place maybe, okay? But space itself. Okay. We already finished explaining the third example for emptiness, right? We already explained the space one.
Dimaki namgal medok chi yore silani tokpe dup sam nyam zimba tamma to ngui ne de dimaki namgal ti yoma ba sa so medok ti yoma o khu pe le chen tokpe xiang pa ko tokpa chi pa xiang pa ti pe le cha re ma to Vagi Namki Metal me para let the pillow. Unda the top bench, you running tomorrow when you do Mares. Topa on she will talk pa, Shapa, Copena, Messing Namgi Metal here, or when I don't mean to pay my child. Topa on she will pass Shapa, maybe pillow.
When we talk about a flower that grows in midair as being a good example of something which is a construct, we're talking about the quality that a flower that grows in midair has, that its existence, its only existence, is as an imagined object. Okay, so it's just something that you have imagined and that you have created in your imagination. So the point here is that the point of the illustration here is that a flower that could just appear in midair without any dirt, no water, no seed, could just boom, come out in midair, is an example. The point here is that it's an example of something which is imaginary, something which has been created in your mind and is projected out there, and whose only existence is in your own mind. The minute you tell somebody the word flower that grows in midair, they do have some kind of mental image of something growing in midair. And so that's the main point here, that there's some kind of coming from the mind, that it's created by your own imagination. And that's the point of it here. Now there's another quality of flowers that grow in midair, that's that they don't exist at all. They have no existence at all. And oftentimes they're used to illustrate something which has no existence at all. But that's not the point here. Okay, so it's not the point here that we're using a flower that grows in midair as an example for something that doesn't exist at all. The point here is that from the mind-only point of view, here is an object which does exist, but which it does not have any unique existence from its own side, which is how they're kind of defining concrete reality, right? Something that's out there and has its own way of being, unique way of being from its own side and not dependent on me. So here we have a totally different category of stuff. Constructs are something that exists only as something that exists by virtue of our imagination, by virtue of our mental images. So please don't confuse it here with the other places where it's used as an example for something that doesn't have any existence at all. That's not the point at all. The point here is that the first group of stuff, which is called constructs, is similar to a flower that grows in midair in that it's simply a creation of our minds, of our imagination. No, sir. No, sir. In the text here, they get on to the second example, which is that caused things are exemplified by an illusion, or by a magic show, or by something which is imaginary, illusory, something kind of an illusion, some kind of deception like a movie or a magic trick or something like that. Think of a magic trick. So how is it that things which are caused are described by the mind-only school as being similar to a magic trick? Jetsun Kappa says, I'll tell you about it later. I'll explain it later. Geshe says, I'll explain it to you now. Okay, so how it happens is this. In the mind-only school, they believe that, by the way, we're talking about all caused things. So Geshe says, we can't really describe how every caused thing in the universe is like a magic trick. Let's take one caused thing to be the representative, and he uses a joke in Tibetan, meaning the government representative, the legally elected representative of all changing things. So all changing things in the universe, all functional things in the universe are going to be represented by this one guy named vase or water pitcher. Okay, so water pitcher is going to be our example. How is it that a water pitcher is like a magic trick, according to the mind-only school? In the mind-only school, remember that they think their main thing about this is that the water pitcher and the I consciousness which perceives the water pitcher, okay, the seer of the water pitcher and the water pitcher itself are coming from what we call one substance. They are made of one thing. It says Zeichi means they are made of the same stuff. Okay, so in the mind-only school they say that the water pitcher and the state, the visual consciousness of the water pitcher are made of the same stuff. And in this school, made of the same stuff has a unique meaning. It means that they come from one bakchak, or one mental seed. So there's one mental seed which, when it ripens, is producing both the water pitcher and the visual consciousness of the water pitcher. Now, does it seem that way to us? Does it seem that way to us on a normal basis? Do we go around saying, oh, look, there's a water pitcher which has been created by one karmic seed which has also created my perception of the water pitcher? Do we think that normally? Do you go around saying that? And he says, well, no, you don't. You go around thinking that there's a water pitcher out there, totally separate from me. I'm over here. I'm not the water pitcher. The perceiver and the water pitcher are two totally different things. He says, and by the way, in the school that precedes the mind-only school, which is called the Sutrist school, the second of the four schools, they say that the main trip going on here is that the water pitcher is actually the cause or one of the conditions for the arisal of the perception of the water pitcher. But here in the mind-only school, the take is a little bit different. It's one karmic seed producing simultaneously, in a way, the thing which you are perceiving and the thing which is perceiving it. But it doesn't look that way to you, does it? I mean, to a normal person, it looks like that's out there, I'm over here, that couldn't be being produced by the same seed that I'm being produced by. So there's an illusion here. There's an illusion here. The way it is and the way it seems to be are different. The mind is taking something which really is there, which means the fact that they're both coming from the same karmic seed, and saying that's not there. And when the mind says that something that really is there is not there, then you have what we call an illusion, or then you have what we call a deception, and the mind is being fooled. So in the mind-only school, this is what they mean when they say cause things or functional things are like an illusion or like a magic trick. That's the main point that's the main point of the example when you say that cause things or functional things are like an illusion or like a magic trick. Okay? A little bit tough. Okay. Don't forget that Jetsun Kappa said, I'll explain this later. And hopefully in this class, if we get that far, we'll get to that later too. So I suggest you make a little mark here and say this is something that Jetsun Kappa said he was going to get to later. And it's my hope, who knows, that we can get that far and we'll actually get to the point where he starts to discuss that.
지금도 야게 용도 왜 송경한테 야게 딱 되나 자기 알아만이 되는 한제 디마치기 남가 치다와 티스다 야게 딱 되나 디마치기 남가도 때 잔데 아 각자 토레 각삼라 메카 세샤파 대신도 용도 세데 각자 다 가는 메카 샤퍼 디마치기 남가도 자고지 타이고 세하고 싶으셔 도대 공리 치고는 세하고 싶으셔 다 대라는 세기래 정말 어떤 거도 지금 두들 남나 깨자 뭐
Here on the last line of page 15, in the first half of the last line there, he says, Shenwa Gimana Datsu Ni Chebar Gyura means, I'll tell you about later why cause things are similar to a magic trick. And there he's finished with that one. That's where he actually says that. Then he goes on to say, La means whereas, Yondok Gipedunni, the meaning of the example that was given for emptiness, right, the third group. Kyuneselo means you can get that, it's a natural outflow. Kyu means like an outflow or a stream or a bridge, and he says that's a natural outflow from the sutra that you just had, and between the last line of page 15 and the upper part of page 15, the Buddha himself has given empty space as an example. And Jetsun-Kappa is saying, look, you can get that, your understanding that sutra is a natural outflow of reading that sutra. I don't have to go and explain it to you separately. You just read that message which I just gave you, and it'll just come automatically in a steady flow. The meaning will come to you from that. I'm not going to treat that separately. What does the Buddha say in that section? Geshe repeats again that empty space is the simple absence of anything which would block something. And in the same way, emptiness itself, or that third category, total existence, or whatever you want to call it, is a simple absence of a to the parts of the person or to objects, and that's a simple absence also. So you got that from the absence, simple lack of something, simple fact that something is not there. Easily to empty. I don't have to go into any bigger explanation about it. Nothing. Nothing.
When you never soon be when you soon need to touch the shake, you nothing that will go chene. When you never say anything, I get up to share Holo Pabale, sure some writing, Maduba, Gundala, Ranking to Bamidu, Jixia. Shawala, Jawani, Yondula, turn down when you to Jixia. Take care of some W so that I want to Yama the Chinta, or took the same W when you met to the two here for a mato, Tesunga, Rangi, Tenji, Truba, Ku.
What it means not to have a nature is not to have a nature of existing by definition. If you just do it that simply, if you cover all three with that single characterization in the mind-only school, you'd have a problem. He only used that wording with the first group, which is imaginary things or constructed things. So he says, if you use that, if that specific wording is kind of reserved in the mind-only school for the first group, and if you use that wording to describe what they mean when the Buddha said they don't have any nature, which he did say for all three groups. If you use those words to describe what it means not to have any nature, you're going to get in trouble in the mind-only, within the mind-only school.
Okay. Then sometimes you say, when you may say, Rangi Pay to want to make Selama Senda Magnopa
only school, don't forget you are not allowed to go to that other door through to the Madhyamika school. I'm going to ask you a mind-only school question. In the mind-only school, if they characterize the meaning of things don't have any nature, those three groups don't have any nature, and if they said the meaning of not having any nature is that they don't have any nature which exists by definition, or a nature of existing by definition, do you think there'd be a problem in this school if they said that? Yeah.
때 용다 용서 가서 화는 숨이야. 당나도 배가 막 지나 망고에도 고통을 수수 숨을 샤. 숨자로라 용사를 또 지나 상황다는 간대요.
nyokta-di nagasumyune.
용다 간다서 차와. 라이팅만 두고 뭐니 메시잖아. 용다 독슬아와. 용다도 고통 숨가가네. 샤와 용도 숨가가는 용도. 야 가시에 용이.
Now you said there would be a problem if the mind-only school characterized the meaning of not having a nature as not having a nature of existing by definition. Now does the problem you foresee apply to all three groups or only to some of the three groups? That's good. It seems like you're splitting off into separate mind streams finally. What would be the... we'll do a vote and the majority will win. How many have a problem? How many groups are there with a problem? What are the two? What are the two? Let's go. So would there be a problem with constructs or not? There actually will arise a problem, but for the time being you didn't do too bad. And okay, don't forget, you said there was no problem.
What did it? Not much. Did it? That tinted show, ranking things much to that. Tobacco, what and made the lamna, send them on your hotel, I'll show the show, I only need a show of power. It is clear as a hard or full of power to say, you know the church, you're anything much to soon or what. That be ranking to one you made, she gets a Sienna, you need to call power.
The problem that's going to arise here, you know, you got the easy problem, okay? There's another problem arising here. Don't forget that we're talking about the second turning of the wheel, the middle turning of the wheel, in which the Buddha taught the Prajnaparamita Sutras in their longer, medium, and briefer forms. And don't forget that in the second turning of the wheel, in the middle turning of the wheel, Lord Buddha specifically said that things don't exist by definition. Nothing exists by definition. So if you go saying that what Lord Buddha meant when he said things don't have a nature is that Lord Buddha meant that things don't have a nature of existing by definition, then you are going to become a school that has to accept or agree that the second turning of the wheel was something literal, that the Buddha was speaking literally when he taught the second turning of the wheel. And I guess there's going to be a problem coming with that.
콜로 파바리 다 한다 다 무슨들이 그냥 챙겨 콜로 파바 다 콜로 파바 다 지신도 캐내 소나 쌤다 밀게 다 pai 고자 주다 그래서 콜로 파바 다 지신도 캐내 소나 아니 가르쳐 그러나 오호 근데 진짜 캐는 게 이게 쳇다를 쓰는 게 쳇다를 쓰는 거 쳇다를 막 그냥 차
Sometimes we lose Shishan-chini. And don't forget that since we've shut the door to Madhyamika, the Madhyamika door is shut. That don't forget that according to the mind-only school, if you're a person who believes that the second turning of the wheel was spoken literally, you have fallen into what we call cheta. Cheta means the extreme, or the cliff, or we call it the chasm of believing that nothing exists at all. So the mind-only school says that if you believe the second turning of the wheel was spoken literally, and that the Buddha meant what he said, then you have fallen off into the extreme or the cliff, off the cliff of what we call the extreme of believing that nothing exists, or that things have discontinued. It's called discontinued. Okay. What we're saying, by the way, when we say that you have fallen into the extreme or fallen off the cliff of the extreme, is that your viewpoint or the way you see things has fallen off the extreme. And you don't have to worry that somehow your body's going to fall off the extreme. It's not like your physical body is going to fall off the cliff or something like that.
chetal lungdan di sem di chetal lungdan kiran di tagi ni yue se la wa ni di san 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 chen yang ga ni chetal lungdan ni kiran ha pa jin ha po ta xiang la rang ti tu bo pa ge sha rang ti tu bo sha xiang de san rang ti ni tu bo xiang la me se la mo ni me se la na kin xiang ka cha yi ha se la ma na ke ji ka sem dan so
So suppose you're in the mind-only school. We're going to describe how you fall off the cliff. Version of things that are dependent, things that have causes, and you go saying that those things don't exist by definition. What are you really saying then? That comes from Mewa Chasa. If those things become non-existent, then you and me do too. Anyway, things which are caused, this is the problem, that you would actually be implying in this school that they don't exist at all. So in the same, with the same reasoning, if you look at the emptiness or the yong-group or the total existence that exists with regard to a water pitcher, okay, and if you said, oh, it doesn't have any existence by definition, then you'd be saying it didn't exist at all. You'd be saying it didn't exist at all. So then you'd lose that category as well. Do you think it becomes non-existent or not if you say it doesn't exist by definition in this school? In this school, if you say that the emptiness that a vase has or a water pitcher has does not exist by definition, do you get in trouble in this school? And if emptiness itself becomes non-existent because you accuse it of being not existing by definition, then a thing like a water pitcher would not have an ultimate nature. And then no object around us would have an ultimate nature. It's ultimate reality. Nothing around us would have its ultimate reality. So that'd be a big problem. Nothing would have its own ultimate way of being. So then the ultimate way, the ultimate reality of things would become something that was not the ultimate reality of things. Okay. Then I promised you a problem with constructs, didn't I? You guys aren't so, you aren't so bad, because in the actual scripture itself, at this point, a debater comes and makes the same objection. He says the same thing. How could there be a problem then with constructs? And now here somebody comes up and makes an objection. They say the same thing. They say, I see how you could have a problem if you characterize those other two groups, meaning dependent things and emptiness itself, as not existing by definition. But I don't see how you could have any problem if you described constructs as not existing by definition. I don't see any problem there. Someone comes and makes the very same statement that you guys made.
알아서 남기 매도 세야라는 다 매비 지하로 kwa야 또 배샤와서 kwa야 군다 땅 거랬어. 군다 또 거랬어. 다 군다 요게 지하로 군다 요게 폐쳐 군다 요게 망쳐와도 가르 로지기 또 빠지기 파도 삼모지 땅. 아니 시내 군다고 차는 거야. 삼모 땅 싸고 빨리 시지샤 바나 시지샤 바나 맞다고 시지샤 맞다고 다 그이 띵 똑바 그 바꿔라도 그 삼모 땅 용도 되는 부비 된지 알 하나 가서 된지 거라 값 현대 현다지 그냥 부비 된지고 시내 바꿔라 삼모 땅 바꿔 예 그 인다 되니 뭐그 삼모 똑바 그 아네 그 부비 부바세 된지 예 삼모 되는 시내 부비 된지 시내 다 그 바꿔랑 땅 로니 삼모 땅에 하루 부르지 시내 부비 된지고 차는 다 로디 메나 회 삼동세 시오면은 아니 기분이 파고 제니 이성의 파당 그 투사를 투산 말이야.
타만 하고
아니 미치야 동안 바디에 이어가 싫어. 나네. 답변을 시오 직 삼동 시지 뭐야 시고 바시.
나네.
다 삼동 경 바지 똑바.
나네.
다 바지 똑바 그 바고 미기 하동 나이. 아 예, 다 세상에 바지 동. 이게 진짜 땅은 시내 분비 경지기. 되는 시내 중송아. 삼모가 땅은 시내 분비 경지요. 디디 중송아. 중송아. 똑바 그 삼모 싸워니 마땅나 분비 경지요. 용담 미용고 똑바 그 미리서 내가 제 맞이야 가. 똑바고 시원 가는 되게 봐.
Okay, so with regard to constructs, so we're talking about constructs now. There are two flavors of constructs. There are constructs which really don't exist. Okay, so for example, you can say, you can imagine a flower that grows in midair, and that's in the flavor or the category of constructs that don't really exist. The imagination exists, but the flower doesn't exist. Okay, so that's one way of describing constructs. But then again, there are constructs that form around objects that we think about. So if, for example, we're thinking about a vase or a water pitcher, and we're considering its qualities, we're thinking about the nature of the water pitcher. When we consider an object like a water pitcher, which belongs to the group called dependent things or cause things, when we consider it, though, we have to immediately start forming a mental picture about it, right? What do you guys think? When we consider a water pitcher, and we're trying to solve some problem about it, isn't impermanent, doesn't have these qualities, doesn't have separate qualities. Do we or do we not, at that point, with regard to this thing which belongs to the category of caused things, right, category of dependent things, are we forming mental pictures to understand it better, to think about it better, and even can't we do that without a water pitcher around, just sitting on our bed, considering the qualities of a water pitcher, considering the concepts that regard to it, that relate to a water pitcher? Cannot we do that even just sitting in our bed, considering a mental picture of a water pitcher? 다그러네. 시험하기 때문에 가서 떠뱉었는지.
제가 파기 분바고 되게 경험이 분바 양보 매바 자고. 같이 분바고 되는 분바지 삼으로 거야. 경험 매바 대원인가지. 경험 매바 제바도 혼인이 매바 제송아. 다 경험 매나 아니 갈리 술라는 것도.
So, if we got to a position where we were implying that no caused thing in the world had any existence at all, right? Okay? So if we reached a position where we were denying the very existence of caused things in the universe, then wouldn't we slowly, kind of roundabout way, be denying the existence of all those constructs or thoughts that we have about water pitchers, because there wouldn't be any water pitchers to consider? So, so if you go around saying that caused things don't have any existence by definition, right? Then slowly, in a gradual, roundabout way, you are denying that constructs themselves have any existence. What do you guys think? Does it gradually, in a roundabout way, start to attack the very existence of our imaginations, of our constructs? If you destroyed all the caused things in the world, if you destroyed all the vases in the world, then wouldn't it start to, in a roundabout way, start to destroy all of the way that we think about it, because you can't think about it because we can't have a mental image of it because there aren't any around.
There'd be nothing to imagine.
Da gyune rimki kora gyane da bet topa meva chagres. To tuba din negres. Topa You know, when you want to get someone beat up, you don't have to just confront them face to face and hit them, you know. You can just talk to some people, send them over there, and see what happens, you know, and, you know, in a roundabout way, it's hurting constructs too, isn't it? Yeah. So I'll give you an example, okay? If it happened in the world that all places, all locations, all dirt, right? All earth, all places started to be non-existent, you know? If they started to wipe out all the places, all places on the earth, all dirt on the earth, then would it, in a gradual but very sure way, do damage to our stomachs? Now, our stomachs and those places aren't no big connection, right? I mean, stomachs are one thing, places are a different thing. But if somebody wiped out all the places on this planet, would it gradually do some kind of damage to our stomachs? Near the news. Yeah, it would be the case, wouldn't it? You know, places are just external, faraway things. Stomachs are internal, intimate things connected to us. No real obvious relationship between the two, no real obvious connection between the two. But it is certainly the case that if all the places on this planet were wiped out, then certainly something would happen to our stomachs eventually. Okay. Geshe is about to, then he's summarizing, Geshe is summarizing. So we found that it wasn't a problem to characterize cause things as having a nature which is such that they do not exist by definition. And that was no problem there. And it wasn't such a problem to characterize, what was the other one? Ultimate reality as having a nature such that it didn't exist by definition. And we didn't have a problem with that. But when we got to, what was the other one? Imaginary things, construct. Backwards? Sorry.
There's a problem with those.
Yeah, there is a problem with those two. Okay, you get a direct problem with emptiness if you characterize it as having nature of not existing by definition. And you do get a problem with cause things if you characterize them as having a nature of not existing by definition. Direct problem. But indirectly, you get a problem with constructs if you describe them as not existing by, not having a nature of existing by definition. You do get a problem with them in a way that you are, Kundat means you are implicitly denying their very existence. Kundat means to say about something which does exist that it doesn't exist. So you are implicitly putting down or denying the very existence of something which really does exist if you characterize it as something as having a nature of not existing by definition.
이제 좀 된데 이 도대 공대는 세하고 쓰는 도대 공대 다 가봐도 쓰는 되는 슈슈뚜뚜 그봐 슈슈뚜뚜 인간 다 꾸미야 돼 인생이 맞더라 개다른 양은 공대네 예 공대 시비 상은 양다 봐 지다 봐 라도 미시에 되죠 대 가르치에서는 콜로 바바고 셈담 르르샤체 셈담 르르소 시샤잖아 콜로 바바들은 예 식신의 소에 보다는 투삼신 공부하니 뭐니 가가 있는데 공부하고 딱딱 마시네 식신은 신지 캔랭게지 강사스네 중은 다 대체 따라 좀 좋아 따와들 교수 그래서 교수도 가르쳤으나 되니 오호 되는 뭐 시왕 용 군다 순가 전지 된 짬이
So the fact that if you characterize as not having a nature as being, what was it? Not having a nature of existing by definition for all three. If you characterized all three that way, then there'd be the same problem would come for all three, is also backed up by Lord Buddha's own statement in his own book. So from the mind-only point of view, the second turning of the wheel, they say that the Buddha says in this section, he says, you cannot take what I said literally and what I meant as being the same thing. Okay, so we're on the page 16, last line. Lord Buddha himself says, when I taught the second turning of the wheel, you shouldn't take what I said in my speech to be literal. There's a distinction between what I said and what I meant. Those are not the same things. How does it apply? Why shouldn't you do that? Lord Buddha himself says, you will fall into the extreme of thinking things don't exist, or thinking nothing exists. And then Lord Buddha himself says, because you will be thinking that with regard to each of the three groups. And he names the three groups. So you can't go around saying that it doesn't hurt one group and it hurts the other two groups or something like that. He says, you have to accept that it hurts all three groups, not only because it's logically true in the way that we just proved in the roundabout thing, but also because scripturally, by scriptural authority, Lord Buddha himself said, if you take what I said and what I mean to be the same, then you will be falling into the extreme of thinking that nothing exists, and because you will be thinking that about all three of those groups. And Buddha himself says all three of those groups.
여기 도리 공리 찍고라 다치 신도 해내나 다치 신바 해나 매당 채달을 준비 잘 통해요.
젠디듀스. 네.
통바티 다 다치 신도 신이 다치 신이 되게 가르나 쓰기야. 콜 와장 신나 세하고 통해 콜라 이래죠. 또 봐봐 나네 셔타는데 그런 담을 랑 신이 맞 통하고 콜통만 아시 딱딱 해내서 다치 신바 해는 게. 네. 그거는 보통 세하고 딱 나로 자기 다이네
So that quotation from Sutra stretches all the way up to page 18, line 2. And then Jetson Kappa goes in again to that point that, in the second turning of the wheel, the Buddha said that nothing has a nature of existing by definition. Now if you go ahead and start accepting that he meant what he said, and you start saying that these things have, when you say that they don't have a nature, you mean to say they don't have a nature of existing by definition. If you start saying that, then you know what? You become a person who is believing or accepting that the second turning of the wheel was something that was spoken literally, and that the Buddha said what he meant, and what he meant was what he said, and that they match. You are in trouble of becoming a person who believes that what the Buddha said during the second turning of the wheel, he meant literally, and then according to you mind-only people, what? You're saying nothing exists. You've fallen off the cliff. You've fallen into the extreme of saying nothing exists at all, according to your own school. Okay? That's
샤와랑게 생기 마좀나 되니 용도 그냥 매번 차도 군다에 매번 차도
To summarize everything that's being said here, you can say it in a very simple way. If dependent things exist, if the group called dependent things exists, then the other two groups can exist too. Okay, then there would be the other two groups. So, if you have any one of them existing, you could say the other two groups are existing. But if you said of any one group, for example, dependent things, that it didn't have a nature of existing by definition, and if you said that it didn't exist, therefore, then you'd have to be saying that about the other groups as well. If any one of the necessary three groups has some ontological status, which is either existing or non-existing, then as a group, the three groups are either broken up or not broken up. They can either exist or can't exist. If you start denying the existence of any one of the three, then as a group, their validity is changed and they become non-existent. Okay? Listen.
It is. How call power 콜로 파베나 연디 뒤중에 나라 가상 수 최탐지라 최초 가져자니 봐.
Oh boy. We talked about the middle turning of the wheel the other day, and we said there are certain characteristics to describe it, or certain different categories, or certain different kinds of things in the second turn of the wheel. How many was that? I'm not asking about the first one. The second turn of the wheel. There were certain categories, certain characteristics or certain features that I spoke about. The I wasn't concerned so much about the separate categories of how many things it was from physical form up to the top, but how many characterizations, how many different descriptions did we use to describe those things? One guy says 5, one guy says 3. I think you guys would be really good Mo divination, you just roll them and say, oh, 3, With a Mo, you can say two different things and the same thing happens anyway. That's in the book, right?
Yeah.
That's in your notebook, right? That's a Mayenga. Mayenga. Yeah, it's in my notebook.
Oh, that's it.
Well, if there's 5, maybe you can tell me the first.
You reversed yourself. You reversed yourself and said that nothing had any existence. Things do not start by their own accord, etc. You said nothing starts by its own accord or definition.
That's the first of the 5? That Debnala, Kewa Dingoni Mepa. That's the second one. Kewa Ngoni Mepa. The thing that things don't start by themselves. Don't forget that existing by definition is the one that applied to everything, so he didn't really make a big point about it. And then we started with number 2 by saying things don't start from their own assumption. And that's actually number 2, because the first one covers all of them.
Oh, that's ranking the Geshe Thubten
So we said say things don't have any. Then we said there's a problem with things that are caused, and there's a problem with emptiness itself, didn't we? Didn't we just say that?
I think you said that if you agree with things that are caused, then the other two categories you can agree on.
Yeah, then gangi somebody chita Yongdrup Shawan on Yokta Yonanda, Kundala Yokta So we do have a problem though, right? I mean, just the basic thing is we do have a problem if we characterize things as not existing by definition, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So this morning, the whole thing we did this morning, the whole point of the thing we did this morning is that in the second turning of the wheel, in the middle turning of the wheel, the first characteristic that Lord Buddha talked about was that things don't have any nature of existing by definition. And then we just got through saying that if you say that about those three groups of things, you have a problem, right? And if you go to the second characteristic, the second feature, the second description that Lord Buddha made during the middle turning of the wheel, which was that things don't start. The starting of things doesn't have a nature of existing by definition. Things don't begin by definition. Then you get the same three houses with the same three groups, don't you? So a question for you guys. If we take those three groups of things, right, constructs, changing things, or dependent things, and emptiness itself, right, and you kick out changing things and emptiness itself, and you stick to, what was that, imaginary things, or constructs, right, if you stick to constructs in the mind-only school, if someone comes along and says, it doesn't have a nature of existing by definition, do you have a problem or don't you have a problem? Kick out those other two now, isolate constructs. If you say in the mind-only school about constructs that they don't have a nature of existing by definition, do you have a problem or don't you have a problem? Yeah, and that's why you guys originally said, oh, two of them have a problem, one of them doesn't have a problem. So that's why you can come now and say, well, if you take away those two and just stick to this one, then you don't have a problem. That's why you could say that, right? Take that whole logic that we just talked about with those three and everything I just said and apply it now to our new one. So now, if you take the second characteristic or the second description that Lord Buddha spoke during the second turning of the wheel, the medium turn of the wheel, which is that the beginning of things or the birth of things or the arising of things or the growing of things does not exist by definition. And if you kick out things that depend, things that grow, and if you're only talking about things that are constructs and emptiness itself, do you have a problem or don't you have a problem? No problem. Obviously, it's another case of you don't beat the guy in the face right there. You send guys after him, and it hurts him, by way of things. So, does it directly have any problem with things that are dependent? When you say that it doesn't have any nature of growing, by definition, do you have a problem with things that are dependent, things that grow? Didn't know that? The Shewan can get the stamina. So it's almost the reverse, right? It's a reverse image of the other one. When a problem comes about saying it with regard to things which are caused or things which are dependent, then by implication or indirectly, you start to have a problem with saying it about things which are constructs and things which are emptiness.
간대리 시디다 샹 랑텐 좋아 맨 샹 사람이 친구가 된다라고 대차도 또 빠고 매버차 또 매버서는 군다 매버차 대인가도 땅을
if you say something which would invalidate the existence of things that are dependent, things that come from causes. For example, if you say about them, they don't have a nature of starting by definition, then you get the indirect damage done to constructs is that the ability to make a construct, the imagination itself, is one of these objects. It's one of those things that's dependent. It's one of those things that has causes. So if you wipe that one out, if you wipe out the ability to imagine, the ability to create a construct, then you're doing damage indirectly, sort of directly, indirectly, to the constructs themselves. What did we say about things that are dependent? Do we say they didn't have any nature of existing by definition, or did we say they don't have any nature of growing by definition? Just now. What did we say about that? So keep that distinction in mind. We're not talking about not having a nature of existing by definition. Right now, at this point, we're talking about things that are dependent, not having a nature of starting or growing by definition. So the logic here is the same as before. If dependent things didn't have a nature of growing by definition, so if they therefore didn't exist at all, then the ability to imagine wouldn't exist either, and then the things which the ability to imagine imagines wouldn't exist either, and you do damage to the category of constructs. So now we go to the third category. What is the third group? We're talking about Yongdu, emptiness itself. Okay, and don't forget that every kind of emptiness has to have something that is empty. It has to apply to a certain object. You have to say, this thing has its emptiness. This thing has its emptiness. Every kind of emptiness that exists is an emptiness that exists with regard to a basis or with regard to a certain object. So for example, when we talk about a chair, then we talk about the emptiness of the chair. The emptiness of the chair is a quality that applies to the chair, that is connected to the chair. So what happens, says Geshe, what do you guys think happens if we remove the chair because we denied that things that are dependent grew by definition? What happens if we wipe out all those chairs? I like your example of a chair, and I did use the example of a chair, but I was more asking the question of, if you wiped out all the bases, plural, of emptinesses around the universe, then what do you think would happen? Your idea will help my other question. So my question for you is a very more general question. It's a generic question. If you remove the thing which has the emptiness, what happens to the emptinesses? What happens to all those emptinesses?
마치 돈이 봐 내가 양직다 양하면 tuksa 아마 미싱다 마서는 아마 tuksa 양하고 내가 차서 군다를 찍미와 군다면 군다 이제 돈이 봐 되게 양하게 되게 돈이 되면 양이 타마타마고 돈이 담에 치는 거 그 용도 담에 누구
You should have in your minds a little. We've been talking about what would happen if you wiped out all the things which are caused in the world, and then their emptinesses would go away. But don't forget we have that first category to consider, which are constructs, right? So we didn't mention constructs. If you wipe out everything that has causes directly, then remember we said that indirectly you'd be wiping out all things which are constructed, because by wiping out all things that had causes, you would be wiping out all the imaginations that imagine all the things, or that dream up all the things that they construct. So really, we're more talking about not just the problem that would occur with all the emptinesses in the world if you wiped out all the things which are caused. We're talking about a bigger problem. If you wiped out all the things which were caused, and therefore by implication wiped out all the constructs, then you'd be wiping out all the emptinesses in the universe, because you'd be wiping out the emptinesses that applied to changing things, and you'd be wiping out all the emptinesses that applied to non-changing things. Then you've got a much bigger problem. You're wiping out a lot more emptinesses. You're wiping out all the emptinesses of everything. So directly, you're wiping out the emptinesses of things that change. Indirectly, you're wiping out the emptinesses of things that don't change, and that's a much bigger problem. Okay. Listen. How, you got it? Got it?
rangi tenyi tu joate me siena ya tenyi sungalo xiao yong kunda sungalo nyokpa cha rangi tenyi tu joate me siena ya yune khasia lo mo kune khasia yune ne kanje xiao da yong kunda sungalo la senza lu la nyokpa cha ji pai.
Therefore, in the mind-only school, if you take the second characteristic, that was spoken during the middle turning of the wheel, which is that nothing begins, nothing has a nature of beginning by definition. Then in the mind-only school, you start to have a direct problem with things that grow, things that have causes. You start to have an indirect problem with imagined things. And then you have a whole bigger implied, the mess gets bigger with all the emptinesses of all those things start disappearing. School. You also cannot accept on face value the second statement of Lord Buddha during the second turning of the wheel, when he said that things don't, the growth of things or the beginning of things doesn't have definition.
다 대단한 것도 깨쳐 쉬어야지 맞아. 라이트 교면은 이거도 차기도 중에 휴지야 받대. 소만 야 받대. 꿈이들이 이제 좀 받대. 꿈이야. 나 야, 마 그니까 저도 뭐니
접기네.
접기야. 접기 꿈이야. 야.
나서.
좀 받대.
나서.
랑기 테이지 뼈아당 각마 매파 숨바 따르 손나 양 xiāwāla puñjī tu yūyī chīrī tāṅgā xiāñīla yāṅ puñjī tu kawā xiēvā o kyakā rāṅgī teñjī mātūna kyakā mē par chū lūsō tā tīrī kēchā tērī tā.
That whole spiel which I just gave you is stated here in the text on page 18. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 lines up, beginning with the phrase that says Rangitsenyi Ki Kyawa, and going on down to 3 lines from the bottom. That whole spiel I just gave you is expressed in those few lines in this text. Okay, you can find it there. Everything that I just said is right there, and he's saying, here are the problems that would occur if you believed literally that the Buddha meant what he said when he said the birth or the arisal of things, and here he says also the stopping of things has a nature of existing by definition. These are the problems that would arise if you believed that was literal in your school. Nothing. And don't forget, says Jetsun Kappa in the 4th line from the bottom, Your school is a school that says that if the beginning and ending of things didn't exist by definition, then the beginning and ending of things wouldn't exist at all. Isn't your school, that's your school, right? And again, he's having that implication, right? Okay, he's rubbing it in a little bit. Like you. You were doing very good, Anila. You found us those 5 characteristics. You gave us the first one. You gave us the second one. Do you remember when we... he's asking everybody, actually. He wants everybody to answer. 첫 번째 도에스 나네 So I got to ask a question about to you guys. You know, we had this point before about the 5 characteristics of the 5 descriptions during the second turn of the wheel, and you've done a good job on that. But I have a question to ask you. Didn't we organize those into some kind of groups? Was there any kind of groups that we organized those 5? Or did we just talk about the 5 individually, you know, one group of 5? Or did we organize them into kind of any kind of separate groupings? Chiktan Shisores. Chiktan Shisores. Topani. It's nice to meet an elected official for a whole group of people. Meaning, did anybody else also remember that? Country tension, you know, that background tension, you know, love me. He likes everyone answers it. Answering in one voice. He asks a question, he gets 20 answers back at the same moment. What you say is exactly right. Yeah, we had 5 and we took 1 out and we treated it as a separate group. We took 4 out, treated it as a separate group. Came out with 2 groups. You're right. So now on page 18, we're going down and talking about the 4. She did a lot. No, sir. So he would... So now we get that distinction between the 1 and the 4. And now this second category, by the way, the small lettering there is not part of the original text. That somebody is adding that because the text tends to say second. So somebody has put them in there for you. He says, there's a question coming up to Judson Kappa. If that's what it means when we say in a general way that things don't have any nature, meaning any nature of existing by definition, which is the first of the 5, right? Then how does that apply to the latter 4? Okay, how does your description that you just finished apply to the latter 4? Okay, of the 5 characterizations that occurred during the second turn of the wheel. Okay. That's the road we'll have to travel.
아니 16에 세와 코란 쪽지 시리아를 싸움
So we're talking about, when you talk about the path we're going to travel, meaning I think he's closing up, right? And he's saying the path that we have to travel now is the question of, in the second turning of the wheel, according to the mind-only school, who cannot accept it as being literal, who are forced to accept it as not being literal, then what did the Buddha have in mind? What was the Buddha thinking? What was the Buddha's true intent when he spoke during the second turning of the wheel about things not having, about these four things not having any nature of existing by their own? And I want to give you an example of what it means when a person says something and has a different thing in mind. Okay, when they say something that they are saying, but they don't mean it to be taken literally, and there's something else they have in mind that they're trying to communicate to someone else. So let's take the example. You know, I'm a monk. We're monks around here. Let's take the example of a monk. Now, monks, we might have a student. You know, there's a teacher who has a student, and he's got this kind of a cup on his table, and he's talking to the student. He says to the student, "Could you go wash that cup out for me?" You know, and then the student goes over to the bathroom, and you hear him banging around the sink, and then you hear this big crash, and he dropped the cup, but he didn't break the cup. Okay, and then if the teacher calls out to him and says, "Excuse me, could you break that cup for me?" The teacher isn't meaning it to be taken literally, right? He's got some kind of other message he's trying to communicate to that student. Okay, so that would be a true example. That would be a good example of the concept of a person saying something and wanting to communicate a different message. And the student is thinking, aha, the teacher told me, break that cup. But what he means is, God damn it, don't break that cup. Totally opposite. So it's the same thing with the second turning of the wheel. If you are a person who's sitting in the mind-only school, okay, if you're a member of the mind-only school and you're reading about the second turning of the wheel, and Lord Buddha keeps saying, nothing has any nature of its own, nothing has any nature of existing by definition, none of these things have any nature of their own, and you keep hearing Lord Buddha say this over and over and over again, you begin thinking, he must have something in mind, he must have some other message he's trying to communicate to me when he says nothing has any nature of its own. It's just like the teacher saying, don't break it. It's just like the message of don't break it or break it. Okay, there must be some message, some real message that the Buddha had in mind when he made those statements about nothing having any nature of having any definitive existence. There must be some message in mind, like the teacher's message of don't break it. Okay, which is an implied message or the true intention of the teacher when he says break it. Okay, when he says break it, what he means is don't break it. There must be some other message that Lord Buddha was trying to communicate to us, like in that example. How many real messages do you think are contained in the second turning of the wheel? How many were the real messages he was trying to convey? What are the real messages that Lord Buddha was trying to convey during the second turning of the wheel to a mind-only person, Mimi? Well, when you say the real message, you're implying a mind-only person. I added that because, when you say real message, you must be speaking from the point of view of the mind-only school, because it's only, you say the words real message only when you believe that he wasn't speaking literally. What was he really trying to communicate? How many things was he really trying to communicate? I'm just asking you, what do you generally think about it? I'm not, I don't need a real, let's just have what did you say? It's an open question. Give me an open answer. What are the two that you think? What are the two real messages? 공식되네.
가능하면 뒤 계산이만 어떤 강단 콜로 바발레라 이제 맞추고 좀 공식 그만 이렇게 좀 해다. 뭐 야다. 생각만 하지.
I've shut the door to the middle way. We don't want to go over there into the middle way room, okay? Stick yourselves to the mind-only school. What was it that the Buddha had in mind when he got up and said, nothing has any nature of its own? Nothing has any nature of its own. Or give me one. The rangi tseniki ngoni never say kablia. Rangi ngom me segi. How many? I want some numbers.
Well, one would be don't mistake cause things with being ultimate. That would be one.
Shenwan that's a dunda mayen se se chile. You're kind of being clever with me, you know. I asked you how many, and you gave me one.
They'd probably be 5 corresponding.
Nayana, Suna. This is really good for people to tell the future with those dice, because if you say, maybe you'll die on the first, maybe you'll die on the third. You guys make up your mind. I'm not a diviner, you know. I'm not doing predictions. Sometimes Lulia, Yawa Sunni, Shawan Kundang, on the Sunni, that page goes to Sunni. You said you thought that what it was, but thinking what it was is not quite knowing what it was, is it? Just kidding, it really is 3.
콜로 바발레 최어탄대랑 팀이 맞고 송바티 티그라다랑 팀이 맞고 두가 이나야 홍바 비자티 시왕테 오상 유드 따네 마티 껴왔잖아 네 내가 찾아서 나는 네 그게가 봐 껴왔지 당당한 거다 티티차네 다 용도가 있나 최다 기모를 줘봐고 있네 제가 얘기를 팀이 네
you're right, it is 3. With the first one, it's sort of directly what he said. With the first one, which is imaginary objects or constructs, it's exactly what he said. They don't have a nature of existing by definition. And so, from the point of view of the first of the 3 groups, yeah, what he was saying when he said they don't have a nature of existing by definition is pretty much what he meant. Meaning that imaginary objects don't have a nature of having any definitive existence, okay? But then when he got to the second one, and he said things that are dependent or things that are caused don't have any nature of growing, right? Don't have any nature of starting. Then what he meant to deny was that they don't have a nature of not having causes. So when he said they don't have a nature of existing by definition, what he meant was not that they don't have a nature of existing by definition, but they don't have a nature of and then when he said of the right, emptiness itself, when he said it doesn't have any nature of existing by definition, what he meant was it doesn't have any nature of existing in the way of a self-existent self, of existing in the manner of the gotcha. It doesn't have any nature of existing in the way of a thing that could exist on its own by itself. But what he meant was, emptiness does not have a nature of existing in the way that something would exist that existed on its own or by itself. Okay? In the way, within this school, of the ultimate object which we are denying when we talk about emptiness. That's what he meant. Okay? When he said about emptiness that it doesn't have a nature of existing by definition, what he meant was emptiness doesn't have a nature of existing in the way of a self-existent thing. And that's what he meant. Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing.